And welcome back to this 19th video in the series. Congratulations on getting this far. Now, the previous video was a major one. We covered a lot of ground and there is a lot to be absorbed. In fact, it's probably going to take a minute for all that content to properly sink in. And that is okay, just trust the process. Now, moving forward for the next few videos, I am planning on keeping things in a format that is relatively short. So it will get you the time that you need to get all those techniques that we discussed under your belt. And to give you a little bit of a roadmap, the idea here is to cover a few small but important techniques that I used in the previous video while I was 3D modeling and that we haven't yet discussed or reviewed. Things like the proportional editing, precise measurements, statistics, snapping tools, and so on. In fact, the topic that we will discuss today are snapping tools and also how to fix the problem of recentering a mesh when something goes wrong. But just before we do that, a quick reminder that I have updated the ArtStation project files. Now, release 1.1 is the latest version, so go get it. Now, super brief review of the content. You will find that additionally to the first project scene that we have been using all along since the beginning of this series, there are now 2 more projects. The second one is the one that you're looking at, and it is just, like a little exercise for you to build those skills of 3D navigation that you're going to need to move forward and to move confidently in 3D space, to tackle the process of 3D modeling. Now, the third one is simply the 3D model that we built in the previous video, just in case you would like to take a closer look at it at your own pace. All I've done is simply cleaning up a little bit the outliner, renaming things better. And like we said, this is just a first iteration. It's not finished. It's an intermediate step. And later on, we'll see how to take this further to a level that is acceptable for production, may it be digital production, like props for video games or animation, or may it be like physical manufacturing for 3D printing, for example. Okay, so today we are going to use this project file and we're going to use it to discuss, well, first of all, how to recenter an object when something goes wrong. Okay, so let's take a look at what happened here. For some reason, we got to this point, and here I wanted to revolve the mesh, but for some reason, I noticed that the center was off. And so I had to do something to resolve this problem. And what I did here is I repositioned the center point, and I'm going to show you right now how to do that and walk you through it. Okay, so I've recreated the issue for us over here. And so what happened during the 3D modeling was that I had my mesh, and then I wanted to revolve it around the Z-axis, and to do so in a precise way, I needed for it to be centered. But for some reason, the origin point got knocked up all the way over here, and so everything about the mesh now is pivoting around that point, right? So one thing that I could have done could have been to go over here to Object, Set Origin, Origin to Center of Mass, and that will recenter the origin of the surface at the center, basically, of the object. And that can work in some cases, although in that specific case, I didn't need the origin point to be at any place, like here at the center, but I needed it to be in a specific point, which was, in this case, would be something like over here at the middle section of the whole surface. And I wanted the most extreme vertices, the one where the mesh ends. And so what I could do to fix that, and what I did back then, was this. I entered edit mode. I selected one to select the vertices. I found the vertex where I wanted to have my origin. And then what you can do is this, Shift S, and you're gonna place the cursor to the selected. So what that will do is that it will place the 3D cursor over to the vertex that you have selected. Then you will go out in object mode, and then from the same tab, set origin, but this time, rather than using the center of mass, you will set the origin to the 3D cursor. And so in this way, you can control exactly on what vertex your origin is going to get snapped to. Now, once you have done that, it's very easy to reset the position of the object. So for example, if I needed it to be at the center of the grid, I would just input 0 over here. And now I have solved my problem. So this ties back to a concept that we saw a while back, and that is that the origin of objects, which is also their pivot point, and the 3D cursor are 2 elements that kind of play in tandem. And you can use the 2 together to do all sorts of tricks. And talking about tricks that you can do by playing together with the pivot points and the 3D cursor, here is one. So the purpose of this exercise, for example, is to train your skills of 3D navigation and your ability to move objects in a sort of precise and controlled way, right? But if you were to try and manually align this, it would take you a very long time, which was kind of the purpose of the exercise, right? To get you to spend time aligning things so you can get very comfortable with the idea of having to move things in a precise and controlled manner. However, like everything in 3D, there is a more elegant approach to this. So here's the trick. Suppose that I start from this mesh, I could select it. And one thing that you have seen me do a lot in the previous video was to have the X-ray on. And then with B, I would create a box and select the whole half of a mesh and maybe delete it. In this case, I'm just going to hide it. And so I have clean access, clean line of sight to the center of the mesh. Now I've pressed 1 to go into vertex mode and I'm finding this vertex. Now that I have this vertex selected, I'm going to do the same trick as before, Shift S, and I'm going to bring my cursor to the selected. I'm then going to go in object mode and I'm going to do object, set origin, origin to 3D cursor. And so I have now temporarily moved my pivot point to that vertex over there. I am then going to go over here in this mesh and I'm going to do the same, hiding half of it. And then I'm going to go and find the point of interest where I want the two meshes to meet, which in this case is this vertex over here. And then I'm going to do Shift S and once again, cursor to selected. And so if you can see what I did here, I've now placed my cursor over here and this is my other point. And what I can do now is Shift S, selection to 3D cursor, and just like that, they will snap in place. And this is more precise and more elegant a solution than anything you could do by hand. And that is the power of learning how to use the pivot point and the 3D cursor together to snap objects, but also to recenter them. Okay, and now for the last part of this video, the snapping tools. Okay, so the snapping tools come from this icon that looks like a magnet at the top of the 3D viewport. And you can click on this and it will activate, it will become blue. And then to the right, you have several options. And basically those are all the modes of snapping that you can possibly want to use. So for example, you could have grid selected. And then when you have a mesh that is active, if you, for example, try to move it, it will snap to the grid. So that is pretty straightforward. And as you can imagine, everything else works pretty much the same way. So if I select snap to vertex, it's going to allow me to snap things to the vertices that I am hovering over with my mouse. Okay, so right now I have this other cube over here, which is part of the same object, right? So we are in edit mode and I have this big object that has within it 2 cubes. And so I have this one selected and I'm hovering over the vertices of the other one and it's snapping to them. Now, likewise, you can do the same for example, edges. So you can align things like this, faces, and so on. However, the way you saw me using it during the 3D modeling workflow, which is the way you will use this tool most of the time, was that I made sure that snap to vertex was selected. And then rather than activating it from here, I would use a shortcut to activate it. Okay, so here I have recreated a situation that is, at least in concept, similar to what we saw during the 3D modeling workflow, where I had a curve with some points, okay? And in this case, I made it random. And then what I need to have are these points that are absolutely flat on the x-axis, but on the z-axis, I need them to match these points, and I also want them to match on the y position. So the way I can go about it is that I can select the vertices that I'm interested in, and then I can press G and Z, for example, to move it like we have done so far, okay? But when I'm close to this, which is my target, I can hold down Control, and that will activate temporarily the snapping tool. And so right now, I have snapped it to the same Z of that point. What I could do next is press G and Y to move it horizontally. And once again, I'm going to press Control down, and that is going to snap it in place. And now I have matched the Z coordinate and the Y coordinate with that one. They're precisely aligned, with the exception of the X, which would make them overlapping. And now I can do the same over here. And as you can see, in no time, I have matched the same weird shape that I have over here, but I've done this on this clean surface. And so this is a technique very similar to what I've used during the 3D modeling process, where in the 3D modeling process, the need was slightly different. In that case, what I had was a clean line, like maybe this one could be. And then I created several vertices on it as vertex points. And then I modeled my target surface to make sure that it was aligned perfectly to those vertices. And so once again, this is one of those things that you can use it in so many creative ways. So snapping, whether it is through the snapping tools or through the duality of the 3D cursor and the pivot point, is an extremely powerful technique that affords you to save a ton of time. It also affords you to create very clean, intentional surfaces. And also it helps you work on axes that are very weird and that are not necessarily aligned with anything like the 3D world or the local axis of a mesh. Okay, so that is it for today. And like I said, for the next few videos, we are just going to review techniques like the one we discussed today. Try to keep the format short so that you can have the time that you need to really absorb all of these techniques. Cool. So I'll see you in the next video.